Picture this: streets filled with protesters, tear gas in the air, police radios crackling with orders. Then comes the command that would change everything: shoot them. But instead of the crack of gunfire, there was something unprecedented: silence. Kenya's riot police, long seen as unshakable instruments of state power, did something extraordinary. They refused to obey. What happened next didn't just save lives in that moment. It sent shockwaves across an entire continent and revealed something profound about the changing nature of power in modern Africa. Today, we're diving deep into this remarkable story and exploring how one act of conscience in Kenya connects to a much larger transformation happening across our continent. To understand the magnitude of what happened, we need to grasp just how explosive the situation had become. Kenya wasn't just experiencing another round of protests. This was a nation at a breaking point. For months, ordinary Kenyans had watched their purchasing power evaporate as fuel costs skyrocketed and food prices spiraled beyond reach. But the economic pressure was just the surface. Underneath simmered decades of frustration with corruption scandals that seemed to have no end, and a disturbing pattern of police killings that had destroyed trust between communities and law enforcement. The spark that ignited this powder keg was the death of blogger and activist Albert Oduor Owuong while in police custody. His death wasn't just another statistic. It became a symbol of everything wrong with how power operates in Kenya. Citizens saw in his fate their own vulnerability to a system that seemed to value control over justice. Within days, protests erupted across the country. From the bustling streets of Nairobi to the coastal city of Mombasa, from Kisumu in the west to smaller towns across the nation, Kenyans took to the streets demanding accountability. These weren't just angry mobs. They were teachers, students, small business owners, unemployed youth, and working families who had simply had enough. But here's what made this moment different from countless other protests. The government's response revealed just how disconnected political leadership had become from the people they claimed to serve. When senior security officials issued what can only be described as a shoot-to-wound directive, they fundamentally misread the moment. The order was crystal clear. Riot police were instructed to fire at protesters who refused to disperse or were seen damaging property, specifically aiming for their legs as a means of crowd control. To the political establishment, this seemed like a measured response. Not shoot to kill, but shoot to incapacitate. In their calculation, it would demonstrate state resolve while stopping short of the kind of massacre that could trigger international condemnation. But to the officers who received these instructions, it represented something entirely different. It was a direct challenge to everything they had been told about modern policing, about their oath to protect life, and about Kenya's supposed commitment to human rights. The legal context here is crucial. Kenyan law, like international human rights conventions, strictly limits the use of lethal force to situations where there is an imminent threat to life. Shooting at protesters engaged in property damage or road blockades doesn't meet this threshold. Not even close. The Kenya National Commission on Human Rights immediately issued a warning that any officer following such orders could face personal criminal liability. Think about what this means. These officers weren't just being asked to risk their moral standing. They were being asked to potentially destroy their futures for the sake of political expediency. More importantly, this order came at a time when Kenya's police force had spent years trying to rehabilitate its image. Training programs had emphasized de-escalation, non-lethal crowd control, and community policing. The sudden reversion to shoot-first tactics felt like a betrayal of this progress. What happened next has been captured in videos that spread across social media like wildfire. At protest sites across Kenya, something unprecedented unfolded. Officers gathered around their radios, listened to the commands, and then, in acts of collective conscience that stunned observers, they refused. Witnesses described the moment as surreal. One video, now viewed millions of times, captures a voice shouting above the crowd noise, "We will not shoot our people." The response from protesters was immediate. Anger transformed into shock, then into thunderous applause. This wasn't a split-second decision by a single officer. This was a coordinated refusal by multiple units across different locations. Officers shook their heads, lowered their weapons, and chose to face potential disciplinary action rather than fire on their fellow citizens. To understand how remarkable this was, you need to appreciate the rigid hierarchy of police culture. These are institutions built on absolute obedience. Orders flow down, compliance flows up. For officers to collectively break this chain represents a seismic shift in institutional culture. The government's response was immediate damage control. Officials rushed to claim there had been no official shoot directive, dismissing the viral videos as taken out of context. But these denials rang hollow, especially after independent human rights groups confirmed they had received credible reports of such orders being issued not just in one location, but multiple sites across the country. Now here's where this story becomes truly fascinating and connects to something much larger happening across our continent. The refusal by Kenya's police didn't happen in a vacuum. It's part of a philosophical shift that's been building across Africa, and at the center of this transformation stands one figure who has captured the imagination of millions: Ibrahim Traoré. Traoré, the young transitional president of Burkina Faso, has done something revolutionary in African politics. He has explicitly and repeatedly pledged never to shed the blood of his citizens to remain in power. This isn't just political rhetoric. It's a fundamental reimagining of what leadership means in the African context. For decades, African leaders have relied on the threat of violence to maintain control. From colonial-era policing designed to suppress populations to post-independence security apparatus used to crush dissent, the model has been consistent. Power flows from the barrel of a gun. Traoré represents a complete rejection of this model. His message is simple but powerful. Real leaders protect their people. They don't kill them. True strength comes from building legitimacy through service, not through fear. This philosophy has resonated far beyond Burkina Faso's borders. Across Africa, young people have embraced Traoré as a symbol of what leadership could be. His speeches circulate widely on social media. His quotes appear on protest placards from Nigeria to South Africa. And his example has become a benchmark against which other leaders are measured. For the young officers in Kenya's police force, many of whom joined during reform efforts promising a new kind of policing, Traoré's message carried special weight. These officers grew up in an era of social media, Pan-African solidarity, and instant global connectivity. They've seen the power of moral leadership and the cost of violent suppression. When faced with orders to shoot their fellow citizens, many of these officers may have consciously or unconsciously drawn on Traoré's example. The idea that real power comes from protection, not punishment, had taken root. What makes this moment even more significant is that it's not isolated. Across Africa, there are growing signs of security forces questioning their traditional role as instruments of political control rather than protectors of citizens. In Nigeria, younger officers have begun speaking out about the need for police reform and accountability. In South Africa, there are ongoing debates within the police service about community-centered policing versus political policing. In Ghana, civil society groups report increased cooperation from security forces in monitoring elections and protecting peaceful demonstrations. This represents a fundamental shift in how many African security personnel view their mandate. The old model positioned police as guardians of the state against the people. The emerging model sees police as guardians of the people, with loyalty flowing upward from communities rather than downward from political leaders. Social media has accelerated this transformation. Officers across the continent are connected through WhatsApp groups, Facebook forums, and Twitter conversations where they share experiences, discuss ethical dilemmas, and debate their professional responsibilities. The Kenyan refusal became an instant case study in these discussions. Within hours of the videos going viral, hashtags like #Traoré Effect and #Protect Not Punish were trending across multiple African countries. Officers in other nations began sharing the videos with comments like, "This is what courage looks like," and "These are the police we should aspire to be." The immediate impact of the police refusal was dramatic. Protesters who had prepared for violent confrontation instead found themselves facing officers who had chosen restraint. The dynamic shifted instantly from adversarial to something approaching collaborative. This change didn't go unnoticed by other elements of Kenya's security apparatus. Military officials, intelligence officers, and civilian security personnel all watched as their police colleagues chose conscience over commands. The message was clear. Blind obedience is no longer guaranteed. For Kenya's political establishment, this represented a crisis of authority. If security forces begin picking and choosing which orders to follow, how can the state maintain its monopoly on legitimate violence? Some government voices immediately began discussing disciplinary measures against the insubordinate officers. But civil society saw something entirely different. Human rights advocates, religious leaders, and community organizers praised the officers as heroes. They recognized that this moment of refusal could be the beginning of a fundamental transformation in how policing works in Kenya. The protest movement itself was energized by this development. Demonstrators who had viewed police as natural enemies began carrying signs thanking officers for their courage. Some protest organizers even began reaching out to police units to build dialogue and understanding. Of course, institutional change is never simple or guaranteed. The refusal created as many challenges as opportunities. Within the police force, there are certainly officers who viewed their colleagues' actions as dangerous insubordination. These officers worried that undermining command authority could lead to chaos during genuine security emergencies. They argue that police effectiveness depends on clear chains of command and unquestioned obedience to lawful orders. The government faces its own dilemma. On one hand, they can't be seen as tolerating insubordination without risking a complete breakdown of state authority. On the other hand, punishing officers for refusing to shoot civilians would be a public relations disaster and could spark even larger protests. There's also the risk of backlash. Some African governments watching events in Kenya may decide to tighten control over their security forces to prevent similar acts of conscience. This could lead to purges of reform-minded officers and the creation of elite units loyal only to political leaders. But the opportunities are even more significant. Kenya now has a chance to lead continental discussions about what modern ethical policing looks like. The country could become a model for other nations struggling to balance security needs with human rights concerns. More importantly, this moment has revealed that change is possible even within institutions that seem permanently resistant to reform. If police officers can choose conscience over commands, then other aspects of governance can also be transformed. What happened in Kenya connects to larger questions about the future of governance in Africa. For too long, African states have relied on what political scientists call negative sovereignty, maintaining power through the suppression of alternatives rather than through positive performance and legitimacy. The police refusal challenges this model. It suggests that security forces, the ultimate guarantors of negative sovereignty, may be evolving beyond their traditional role. If officers increasingly see themselves as protectors of citizens rather than protectors of governments, the entire foundation of authoritarian governance becomes unstable. This connects directly to the broader appeal of leaders like Ibrahim Traoré. Citizens across Africa are hungry for what we might call positive sovereignty, governance that derives legitimacy from service, protection, and development rather than from fear and suppression. The digital age has accelerated this demand. Social media makes it impossible to hide government failures or security force abuses. Young Africans can instantly compare their experiences with those of their peers across the continent. They can see examples of better governance and demand similar standards at home. In this context, the Kenyan police refusal becomes more than just a local story. It becomes a symbol of what's possible when security forces align themselves with popular aspirations, rather than elite interests. So where does this leave us? The ultimate significance of the Kenyan police refusal will depend on what happens next. If this moment leads to genuine police reform, improved accountability, and better relationships between security forces and communities, it could become a model for the continent. Other African nations would have concrete evidence that institutional change is possible. If, however, the government successfully suppresses this act of conscience through disciplinary action and reassertion of traditional command structures, it could discourage similar acts elsewhere and reinforce authoritarian policing models. The international community will also play a role. Human rights organizations, development partners, and African regional bodies like the African Union have an opportunity to support the officers who chose conscience over commands. Recognition and protection for these officers could encourage similar acts elsewhere, but perhaps most importantly, the response of ordinary Africans will determine whether this moment becomes transformational or merely symbolic. If citizens across the continent embrace this example and demand similar ethical behavior from their own security forces, it could accelerate the institutional changes already underway. The conversation has already begun. In online forums, university campuses, community meetings, and even within security services themselves, people are asking fundamental questions about the relationship between citizens, police, and political power. The refusal of Kenya's riot police to fire on protesters may seem like a small moment in the grand sweep of African history. But sometimes the smallest acts of courage have the largest consequences. These officers, whose names we may never know, chose to risk their careers rather than compromise their consciences. In doing so, they joined a growing movement across Africa that refuses to accept violence as the price of governance. They drew inspiration, whether consciously or not, from leaders like Ibrahim Traoré who have dared to imagine a different kind of power. One based on protection rather than punishment, on service rather than suppression. Their act of conscience has already inspired discussions in security forces across the continent. It has shown that even the most hierarchical, obedience-based institutions can change when their members remember that their ultimate loyalty should be to the people they serve. Whether this becomes a turning point or just a historical footnote will depend on all of us. It will depend on citizens who continue to demand accountability, leaders who choose service over self-interest, and security forces who remember that their true mandate is protection, not politics. The conversation has started. The question now is, where will it lead? What do you think? Could this moment in Kenya inspire a continental transformation in how security forces operate? Are we witnessing the beginning of a new era where police and citizens stand on the same side of justice? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this analysis resonated with you, hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into the stories that are reshaping Africa. Ring the notification bell so you never miss our latest content exploring African culture, politics, and the movements that are defining our continent's future. The world is watching Africa, and moments like these remind us why. Until next time, stay informed, stay engaged, and keep believing in the power of conscience to change the world.